two stills that have the final line of the poem, which is a not uncommon thing, which uses a double negative, which is an unelegant way of saying a common thing. Poets are supposed to not do things that are, unelegant or unfancy. And I wanted to have a double negative because, of course, I wanted to point at how strange it is for someone to say that the body failing is a common thing. And so there's two fragments that are in the gallery that show that that phrase. And you'll see that they also have different parts of the body because, of course, the video work is fluid and poetry is fluid and meaning is fluid and time is fluid. And so it represents faithfully. These are actual timestamps. They're not constructed like, oh, that we like this head and we like this fragment. No, these are actual timestamps from the video. And that phrase, a not uncommon thing, accompanies movement. And so the movement is represented.
So when you enter the exhibition, that's the first what you see. And what is always really interesting for us, or one important point is then when we do at the exhibitions in our space, that we also really think about how we will communicate the whole show, how we will go with the collectors or with the people who are interested going through through the space and talking about it. And I think this piece is a perfect starting point because it really brings the people to the poem itself, because then they as you said, they really realize what the value of a poem could be. And of course, for most of them, it's really abstract when you start to talk, and then you talk about the book, then you show them the book, then they hear the sound, and of course, it's a little bit too much because you can't hear and look and do everything at the same time. But then, especially when you go through the whole show and then you come back to the first piece, then they start to realize what this mean, and that that it has this volume on so many levels. And this I like it a lot, and it's of course I like the video piece, but this is for me it's really the piece of the show, I have to say. And also the understanding that with the blockchain inscription, this is really the highest form of our how to say storage of knowledge in a way, like when you think about when the first when you see the evolution, and then you see that everything what the humans was stored in books, like all the knowledge was in books, and you go all through the books to study, to whatever, to when you want to know something. And now we have the digital, and we have the internet. But with the blockchain, for me, it's really the next step and the next, to save who we are. And that's why I really, you have this very profound book with everything in. And of course it's also funny in a way when the people can laugh about it when they see that 197 times the same poem, but then also to understand the next layer in it, that it's really forever.
And yet this particular poem seems to be suspended in time, regardless of the shapes that it takes. It sort of has this, I don't know, it has this very peculiar nature to it, where it is on one hand suspended in time, but then also evolving into various forms, I suppose, formats, of course, but the way in which it shape shifts throughout time while simultaneously remaining a specific set of, elements and memories that are connected to a specific moment in time, I think, have and hold a very strong way of thinking about the process of writing and what happens with that writing once it's placed out there. And that's something that I find very, very striking. I would even say within all of Anna's work, but obviously this one being so deeply personal, holds a different kind of memory to it, holds a different kind of thinking about the process of writing and writing becoming something else. This, everlasting process of becoming that is very, very particular to writing, I would say, and how it relates and how it translates into these different forms. I think it's something that I find very, very compelling and very strong.
about our current financial system.
Thank you so much, NEWFORUM, and thank you everyone for being here, and to the wonderful Anne, my gallerist, and Doreen, the brilliant researcher, curator, just all around a magnificent person who wrote the curatorial text for this exhibition. And we really wanted to start with an overview of what the exhibition is about, because time flies. So I think maybe we just dive right in. I don't think we need intros. There's intros on the website, and I think bios and links to our Twitter profiles, plus lots of your friends. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. It's always wonderful to share space like this, digitally, but also just closer than on social media. And I wanted to start just by talking about what led to the creation of this exhibition. I've been really lucky to work with Office IMPART for almost 3 years now, and it's been a wonderful process
A
for me.
while already, yeah. What a great.
A graduate now, graduate student of Office IMPART. And we started with a series called Being Borges that we released very slowly. We're still releasing that gradually this year. And then Anne invited me to do a solo exhibition. And I always knew that I wanted to do a solo exhibition that hinged around one single poem, presenting it in a multiple ways. I just didn't know what poem. And so I really thought about what I wanted to create. And I chose the poem in question because it's a poem that actually was marked a really difficult moment in my life, but at the same time, it's a poem that is ignorant of the future. And I purposefully never went back and edited it to make it more cognizant. And I like that it has this innocent, but also this knowingness. And I think it's really important for right now, or the moment that we're living politically in general, where things are starting to be more and more imposed, and there's this sort of tendency to silence our inner voices. As women, also, I think we're faced with that almost on a daily basis. And what this poem does is that it documents the day before my son was born, my first child. And I was told that day, on my 39th week of pregnancy, that my placenta had failed and that the baby had to come out. And the doctor was married to my gynecologist, the technician, the ultrasound technician. And he just picked up the phone, and, it was like this very domestic, casual phone call with me on the table saying, oh, yeah, this, that, groceries, and also your patient Anna needs to be induced tomorrow. And so I was induced, and it failed. The baby's heart rate dropped, and then I ended up with an emergency C-section. So I ended up, the baby was fine in the end. The doctor had been wrong. My placenta was also fine. And the weight was much higher than he had measured. Of course, there's human error, and that's something that is part of our life. But at the same time, I felt very cheated of a natural birth experience that I had been preparing for, since I found out I was pregnant. And also, I was drugged up not only with pitocin, which they put to induce, but also the epidural. So it was coming down from all those drugs was intense. And the poem was written that day that I left the technician office, and I didn't know how things would turn out. And I left it like that, and it's part of my book, Mammal, which I published last year. And I decided to take this poem, which is not the most lyrical poem I've written, perhaps not the most sort of technically innovative poem, but it just captures a moment that I wanted to heal. And I wanted to transform that moment into sort of this manifestation of control. And so I work with a really wonderful studio for a long time in South Florida, and I asked them to put me inside the womb. And so at the center of the exhibition is this body of work where the body takes control. And there's an adult body placed inside the womb that doesn't let decisions be made for them. I don't know, Anne, or Doreen, if you'd like to interject.
Perhaps I can share a couple of thoughts that I have, if that's okay. This is really, well, re-listening to the story is always, I don't know, it always brings a very different kind of emotion. That's something that I would definitely say. And what I wanted to share is that when I met Anna, I had already, seen her work here and there, and one of the things that really struck me was the whole process of dealing with a memory, right? So this is a lived memory, an embodied memory, but that each time that it appears, it sort of reappears with something that is slightly different. And in a way, that was something that I thought, when we think about poetry and when we think about, I would even argue, writing in general, not necessarily literature or, but writing in general, it seems to me like it is a process of not necessarily socializing, but certainly putting out something that is deeply rooted within you, right? Whatever that might be, whatever, that might relate to. And something that I thought was very, very interesting that might not be, let's say, immediately legible within this series of works is the fact that it also works as a network, right? It also works really, really close to the materialities that are embedded within the artworks themselves. And I think that there's something there that is very interesting and that we might, I don't know, like we might try and expand a little bit more within the conversation. But I just really wanted to share that it is a very interesting impulse as well to place such a strong memory, such a lived, such a strong lived experience into writing and leaving it sort of like evolve in its own way. Although, of course, we know there's a story that comes afterwards, and yet this particular poem seems to be suspended in time, regardless of the shapes that it takes. It sort of has this I know it has this very peculiar nature to it, where it is on one hand suspended in time, but then also evolving into various forms, I suppose, formats, of course, but the way in which it shape shifts throughout time while simultaneously remaining a specific set of, elements and memories that are connected to a specific moment in time, I think, have and hold a very strong way of thinking about the process of writing and what happens with that writing once it's placed out there. And that's something that I find very, very striking. I would even say within all of Anna's work, but obviously this one being so deeply personal holds a different kind of memory to it, holds a different kind of thinking about the process of writing and writing becoming something else. This, everlasting process of becoming that is very, very particular to writing, I would say, and how it relates and how it translates into these different forms. I think it's something that I find very, very compelling and very strong, particularly in the context of these exhibitions. I just really wanted to share that.
I love that. And I'm really grateful that Anne and Joanna from Office IMPART were open to sort of this very personal, this very intimate, physical, of the body, exhibition. And I'm glad that they were very supportive of the idea to do it. And then that Doreen, you were able to read it so closely. I just wrote that down, everlasting process of becoming. I love that.
Yeah, maybe I can also share a little bit our thoughts about the process. And as we, of course, Anna's, when we start to build an exhibition, or that we know that the exhibition is coming, maybe we start more or less half a year, I don't know, 4 months before really to go deeper and to talk about the piece. And here it started very abstract in a way, I would say, because like of course Anna shared the poem, and then I don't know if you would, I don't know, can't remember if the film was really ready when we saw the first thing or not, but it doesn't matter. So it was so then we always going or following the artist step by step, and of course it's in the beginning very abstract, and for me it wasn't. Of course we know the poem and we know the story, but it wasn't so emotionally because it's more about the process, and we of course think about the pieces and about Anna's overall idea to bring poem to life, and see a poem as an art piece. And then it was really touching, and was really when we had the opening, and then the people are coming, and Anna talked about the exhibition and read the poem, and then you realized again how deep everything was, and how everything comes together, and how many layers we see in this exhibition. But maybe we go then step by step in the things that you can also explore and follow what we are talking about. Maybe Anna, it's better when we start to show some images, right?
So I'm going to, can you guys all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, if anyone wants to follow along, it's just my website, myname.com with Maria, Ana María Caballero.com. You can read Doreen's text in English and German and Spanish. And the exhibition photographs, and then there's an interview here also. But I wanted to share the video work so that things become a little bit more real.
Echograph. Man with ultrasound wand says baby is losing weight. We must take your baby out. I will call your doctor. Tell her to induce you tomorrow. Outside the room, my doctor and wand man are husband and wife. His call, one of groceries, of takeout dog, of pickup kid. And wait, before I forget. Are you sure? I ask. I feel so well. Baby, inside me, feels so well. This is not a thing you'd sense. See, hear, plain, as clear, cold gel. Take mine, reference it. My placenta stopped working. No food for my firstborn. Such physical failure, a not uncommon thing. Echo.
So that's the video work. And then from the video work, because at the heart of this exhibition, of course, is the idea of presenting a single poem multiple ways. And as Doreen wrote in her curatorial text, the poem fractures. It fractures into stills. And I worked really closely with Anne, and I really appreciate that support in selecting the stills, in sort of telling and in helping to tell a story through them. And we selected stills that they were meaningful to both of us, having, different life stories. And when I feel that is that I know that it works. The work works. And there's a privileging of fragments in my work, and I think in modern literature that we're seeing more and more, because it's just the way our lives are working. It reflects our interrupted things coming at us at all times, at all directions. And for me, the fragment really stands its ground and can be as compelling as the whole, and also invites readership to evolve, because it allows the reader to create their own story, to connect with with the story that is told, but also with the story that they're reading. And that act of reading and writing for me is such a generative moment. It's such a moment of give and take, of co-construction. And so these stills tend to invite that. For example, this is not a thing you'd sense. It's such a shocking thing to be told, by a practitioner of medicine, like, oh, you'd never sense your own body. Like you don't, don't even worry. And on the opening night, very late, an elderly gentleman came in, and I remember Anne said, "I'm so surprised he's here." And then she didn't really say anything, and he like said, "I'm sorry, I'm late." And I said, "Oh, it's okay. I'll just give you a tour." And then he ended up just standing in front of this work for quite some time and ended up taking home one of the editions. And after he left, and said, he's been really sick. And he said that the work reminded him of something that his doctors had told him as well. And so that's how I know it worked, right? Because it allowed him to read his own story through something that was completely foreign to him. And then there are two stills that have the final line of the poem, which is a not uncommon thing, which uses a double negative, which is an unelegant way of saying a common thing. Poets are supposed to not do things that are, unelegant or unfancy. And I wanted to have a double negative because, of course, I wanted to point at how strange it is for someone to say that the body failing is a common thing. And so there's two fragments that are in the gallery that show that that phrase. And you'll see that they also have different parts of the body because, of course, the video work is fluid and poetry is fluid and meaning is fluid and time is fluid. And so it represents faithfully. These are actual timestamps. They're not constructed like, oh, that we like this head and we like this fragment. No, these are actual timestamps from the video. And that phrase, a not uncommon thing, accompanies movement. And so the movement is represented. I'll let Anne and Doreen also.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to add here, like also from our perspective as when we did the gallery, the exhibition, I think it's really important that that the works at itself. That it's not just that we not just print some film still, so that's not just a double, so that when it comes to be an artwork by itself, that it, as Anna said, that it works for itself. And this is something what I think we managed to work together and have this different view on it, because you have your personal and you know exactly, every letter what you wrote. But for us, when we come really have an outside view, and of course with our experience over the last years, it's I think it was important for us also to see it and to feel that every piece has its own aura in a way, and it's also understandable without knowing the poem. I think this is when you come to the exhibition and see the exhibition, this is really special because of course everything is holding together by the poem, but every piece by itself, it's also an art piece, and could be read also without the whole story around. And I think this was important for us when we developed the show, right?
And can I just add, this was the work that I think sort of inspired pretty much all of the curatorial text. Of course, it sort of evolves into something else as different artworks start appearing, in a different order. This is actually the last bit of the curatorial text itself, and it was very much on purpose, right? Because one of the things that also Anna and I discussed while getting ready, well, for me to, write the text and getting a little bit more information here and there, something that we kept discussing was intertextuality, right? And what does that mean, and why that makes so much sense when working with, in this case, a multiplicity of materialities, but also very much embedding digital materialities into the mix. And what would be the relationship between thinking about poetry and thinking about digital materialities, thinking about intertextuality, and these multidimensional ways of an artwork unfolding, in this case, a poetry piece that unfolds in various ways. And we sort of came, we're thinking about this back and forth as it relates to how it shifts and changes. And in a way also how it embodies different formats and it becomes something else, while at the same time being very much an extension. So following what Anne is saying, yes, of course, you don't necessarily need to, in a way, engage with every single line of the poem or every single second of a video in order to be able to access, in this particular case, these stills and the composition also that these stills create while being presented within the space. But something that I find very interesting is how, when we think about what the digital is, right? What digital means, and we really break that into very, very simple terms and understand that digital basically means something that could be subdivided into units, and could be, in a way, reassembled or make sense while reassembling these units. An example that I find very compelling and very interesting when thinking about this definition of the digital, but trying to put it a little bit outside of the box and thinking about it outside of, let's say, technological devices. One of the, I would argue, most interesting examples of thinking about the digital in relation to other types of examples would be definitely the way in which we use language, right? And not all languages work in the same way, of course. But when we think about Spanish or German or English, what we have is an alphabet, right? So this alphabet has accountable units. These units are letters, and then we use these letters to compose words, and these words later on become sentences, and these sentences become paragraphs, and so on. And it's very much the same logic when we think about how the digital works, right? It's very much the same notion of being able to trace back countable and discrete units that work around by being reassembled each time, right? So, and again, this is not something that applies to, say, other languages such as Mandarin Chinese or Japanese or Korean, but in this particular case, this does make sense. So we can definitely think about language in this case, the language in which the poem is written, as a language that could also be seen very much as a digital language, right? And that's something that I find very, very interesting because, again, there might be not necessarily a reason as to why we would count down, let's say, how many A's are here, how many R's are there, and yet we can work around it in that way, right? So if we're breaking down as well these specific stills from a video or these specific lines from the poem, we're also working around the digital nature of language while working together with, obviously, the digital nature of the way in which this video was created. And there's something really, really beautiful there that, again, is probably not necessarily part of the conversation of these artworks as such. And yet it is something that provides a very interesting net for it to rest. That, of course, we can see also appearing in a different way within the rest of the artworks that are part of this show. But I don't want to, move too fast into these other ones. I just thought it was a really interesting, a really nice way of thinking about something that sometimes feels very very alien to us, when we think about the digital, and then the digital is something that feels very abstract, but we use that all the time, and especially we think about it and we in a way connect with it through language more than we know. And here I think it is a very, very nice way of putting these two together and making it very not only very organic or very natural, but also very caring as well, right? This is not thinking about the digital and what the digital means is not necessarily something that has to only be seen through the use of certain machines. We can work around the concept of the digital in various ways. And I think poetry in this case is a key example of it. It's something that could be very much central to how this notion could expand into other places without having to think or having to connect specifically to a very sophisticated set of devices or connecting to other types of examples that we already know of, especially since we're working with something that is deeply, deeply personal, deeply intimate.
I love that. And I think that your treatment of language takes us to the book as a sculpture, inevitably. And a project, a series, I should say, that I've connected with both Doreen and Anne on is my series of book sculptures, which see me publish one poem over and over and over in a single book, and presenting it as a sculpture. It's a traditional book, so it's got its own ISBN and the anatomy and structure of a traditional book with a table of contents, a dedication. The dedication is actually left blank. It says to, and then it's left blank. And then it leaves space for the collector actually's name to appear. And it has the same poem over and over. So really what it is a poem as sculpture. And here is some images of the book, Echograph. And here we're really challenging the notion of value, of poetry, the way we've valued poetry as a society. So of course we're used to acquiring poetry books to support the work of poets. But to purchase a book for 12 euros or whatever doesn't really translate into a viable, sustainable model for the poet. And part of my work is not only in presenting poetry as fine art through different medium, but also to elevate it and to ask, why haven't we truly valued poetry as a society in the past? We revere it, but do we actually include it in exhibitions? Do we actually curate it as art? And so Echograph is an edition of one, and it comes with the video, which is purposefully bare. It's just a single page flipping as I read the poem, because one thing that the digital wields that the page does not is voice, is sound. And I also think that sound is very powerful, and it can communicate just as much as the actual alphabet that Doreen was mentioning. And it also comes with an inscription onto the Bitcoin blockchain, because I see the blockchain as an evolution in our file storage mechanisms. And it's another way of recording our memories, of recording precious moments, information, data. And Bitcoin allows for text-only inscriptions. And of course, as the mother of all blockchains, there's also like an added interest in working with it and in wielding it and molding it, especially because it's this finite chain, right? There's no new Bitcoins being mined. So it's this three-part artwork that really elevates the poem, the moment of writing, into a physical sculpture through the book, into a video, and into a Bitcoin inscription. And for me, I think it's this series is probably one of the most challenging. I don't know, Anne, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how you, one of the points that we wanted to touch upon was sort of institutional and collector responses. And I feel like, this is one of the most challenging works for me to communicate, to really sort of share what it is I'm trying to do. And also, it has a practical complexity. People want to hang things on their wall, or maybe they want something in their digital wallet, but do they want a book as a sculpture? And if not, why? Right? At the end of the day, like, that's the question. Why not?
Exactly. Like we placed this piece really at the entrance of the show. So when you enter the exhibition, that's the first what you see. And what is always really interesting for us, or one important point, is then when we do at the exhibitions in our space, that we also really think about how we will communicate the whole show. How we will go with the collectors or with the people who are interested, going through the space and talking about it. And I think this piece is a perfect starting point because it really brings the people to the poem itself, because then they, as you said, they really realize what the value of a poem could be. And of course, for most of them, it's really abstract when you start to talk, and then you talk about the book, then you show them the book, then they hear the sound, and of course it's a little bit too much because you can't hear and look and do everything at the same time. But then, especially when you go through the whole show and then you come back to the first piece, then they start to realize what this mean, and that that it has this volume on so many levels. And this I actually like it a lot, and it's of course I like the video piece, but this is, for me, it's really the piece of the show, I have to say. And also the understanding that with the blockchain inscription, this is really the highest form of our how to say, storage of knowledge in a way, like when you think about when the first when you see the evolution, and then you see that everything what the humans are was stored in books, like all the knowledge was in books, and you go all through the books to study, to whatever, to when you want to know something. And now we have the digital, and we have the internet. But with the blockchain, for me, it's really a next step and a next to save who we are. And that's why I really, you have this very profound book with everything in. And of course it's also funny in a way when the people can laugh about it, when they see that 197 times the same poem, but then also to understand the next layer in it, that it's really forever. I think it's that's really special. And of course, we have to find the right people to understand that it's something that you can have at home and that you can, of course, hang on the wall. But also you don't necessarily have to, like maybe it's also just fine to see the book every day and whatever. But I'm pretty sure that there will be somebody who will understand.
And I think it also follows, again, this conversation that we were having in terms of where would we locate the body of the poem, right? Like what is the body of the poem? Can the poem become this shape-shifting entity that refuses to be captured by a single element or by a single format? Where does it reside, right? And I think that's really the challenge that this artwork is posing. Because I think that in many cases, the questions around this artwork could be, what would be the point of the book, for example, right? If books are meant to be read, but this book has the same poem repeated, a specific amount of times, then the book is not for reading. Then, what's the role of such an object then? But it is also the same kind of question that is posed, I would say, with any layer of this work, right? And I think that what is interesting here is that it makes sense, or it makes the most sense as a whole, as a totality of what's going on there. Because really what's going on there is that the work itself, being the poem, takes, or in a way, it's sort of like it possesses everything it touches. And that's really the magic of it, when you realize that is very much about that. It's that a moment of, yes, I guess, not necessarily taking a different set of stimuli in order for it to appear, but actually for the poem to become a video, to become book, to become part of the blockchain, right? And I think that, I don't know, in a way, there's something really magical there, but of course it is something that is very, very challenging. And when we think about the digitization of various fields, of course, also there's a connection there with the book, right? We always go back to like, oh, well, we don't really read books anymore. We find everything online. We, I don't know, download PDFs or whatever, and yet the book persists. Right. And I think it's very much the same question. If we could potentially access the same type of content elsewhere, why would we go back to the book? And the book holds something that is very special to its body as well, right? To its texture, to its weight, to the way in which we interact with it as an object, and the way in which we connect with whatever is inside of it, even though what's inside of it could be experienced elsewhere. And I think there's something very, again, very, very magical there in this shape-shifting process when you realize that the poem is everywhere and nowhere at once.
Yeah, and for me, really the work is really one very contemporary kind of sculpture. You know, like of course, when you have this art historian term of a sculpture, you think about a 3D object in a way, and of course, that's you have it because you have this book really as a sculpture on one hand, but also it's extended to the digital. So you have the next layer, and this is for me very contemporary because you don't have this either or. So you have the simultaneously in all realities that we are living at the moment. So that's why for me, it's really on point and really in the now. So this I like a lot about the book.
So we go from the book as a concept to the book as itself. Here, I have a new series called Page Break, and I've really read Doreen's text so many times that I have it like memorized. And she writes that the violence of extraction haunts Page Break, and I often quote you on that. And this is actually my book that you buy on Amazon, my book that took me 8 years to publish and write. And yes, it's a thin, flimsy, inexpensive paperback volume that you can buy online on the internet. But for me, it holds a, incalculable value. And I wanted to sort of represent the book as that beloved object by framing it, but not by framing an improved version of it, but by framing the very average version of it. And so what Page Breaks does is that I actually slice the page from the book here as echograph, and then I frame the page beside the book that once housed it. And it represents the efforts that I think are communal. And I include NEWFORUM and thank you Salimi and Madeline for inviting us. It's a communal effort to take poetry beyond the page and allow poets to think of new ways that they might present their work to the world. So it's really just a framed paperback volume, but then that just is quite ironic because again, every book that is published not only takes years usually to write, but then the act of actually getting it published, for anyone who's ever published a book can confirm it is gruesome. And so it's really disheartening as a writer when you realize that, your book that you finally got published will really not have much of a life on a shelf unless you take matters into your own hands, which is what we're doing here.
Yes, and it's also not just framed, like I think when we have now talked to the frame, I think it really becomes an object. It really becomes an art piece because it's, of course, on one hand you have just the pages, but how it's made in the end and how you can hang it now on the wall. You have to see it also behind Anna. It's really special, and it has very, how to say, fine and very delicate art to do it and how you decide to do it. And I think this is really special, and people feel this immediately when they see it because it's not just a book behind the glass. It really comes alive because it has its space. It has its own space in the frame, and I think this is the miracle behind it.
And there's also something playful to it, of being like, well, now it's framed. Now you have to see it in a whole different way. And it seems like it might feel very subtle or even, something that's reasonable in the context of the exhibition, in the context of the body of work that Anna has. But I also thought about it a little bit as like a playful way of, yes, on one hand, elevating poetry to something else. Not that it needs to be elevated in my perspective, but it is also a very simple way of opening up to questions in regards as to how, by framing, in this case, this single page and then the book right next to it, how this diptych becomes something other than just the book or just the poem. and why we feel that way when we're confronted with such a thing, right? And again, I think that it's a very clever way of making that distinction, of breaking that relation to it. And especially when we think about other contemporary art practices that rely very much in this kind of collection of words from different places, right? And we see that popping up a lot during the 60s and 70s, where the actual output is very much like this, although it doesn't necessarily come from the same source, right? It doesn't necessarily come from something that the artists have written themselves, but rather something that they found and put together and assembled in a different way, sorry. So I think that here, I don't know, that's the reason why it feels so playful. Yeah.
Maybe this is a good time to open up to questions. I think that you brought up a really great point that, does poetry need to be elevated? It's a huge can of worms. And what does elevated mean, right? And also, do we need to frame things to value them? I think is a question that I read into what you were saying into your language, and my reading is that question, like, do we need to frame things to value them, or can we value them if no one tells us that they are valuable? Like if there's no artist, if there's no gallery, if there's no curator saying this is valuable, are we able to value them on our own? So we can open this up for questions, or I guess we can just keep discussing internally. But I don't know if there's questions on the website. I know the last 10 minutes we were supposed to make this available for questioning, but we can keep going too. If no one has any questions, we can just keep going.
Yeah, I think regarding your question, if it needs to be framed to be valued, and I think of course not. And when you have, we don't have to necessarily have to do the show about your poem to really understand. But I think to point something out, and to when we have now the visitors, you and this is what we experience every day. You show them the things on a very special level, and you have so much different angles to enter different topics, which we experience. Like everybody has an own story. It's not always that it's the women have stories about giving birth or whatever. It's really like how people relate with poetry and relate with the themes around your poem. So, which I think, of course, we don't necessarily have to put it in a frame, but it's it opens so much up. So, like it really brings something to the people, and this is what I really admire every day, I have to say. And it's yeah. So it's good. It's a very nice experience, I have to say, because normally in a poem, I'm not so much in poetry as you are, And of course, I have some books, and I read your poems, and I read a lot of more literature, but not poems. And so normally you read it by yourself. You're sitting at home, you have a silent moment, and then you read your poems, or in holiday or whatever. But when the people are coming in the gallery, they are, always in a rush, always no time, no whatever. And of course they're taking the time to see the show, but and then you are not alone, and then you react instantly. You see the emotions of the people in the moment because you can't hide it. And I think this is something what is also very special when you put it in a frame, hang it on a wall, on different levels, which I think it's just very nice next level for me.
Amazing. I see that there's 2 questions. Elizabeth, you wanted to ask a question, and then Paola also had a question.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. This talk has been great. I have loved hearing more about this work that I've only seen from afar. But the show looks incredible in Berlin at Office IMPART. And the video itself is so stunning to me. And to also kind of understand or see some of the behind the scenes at Mad Arts has been really fun to see what a poem not only can do, but how it can look in so many different ways from so many different angles. And kind of thinking about this topic of framing and whether we need to frame something to assign it value, or why we even do that in the first place. Like why is something chosen as valuable, or to be exhibited over something else? And so, Anna, this question's really for you. I think in the beginning, if I understood correctly, you said that that this poem, that you wrote it a long time ago, like when this happened, and then you didn't really look at it again. You didn't edit it again when you brought it back. And so my question is, why this poem? Why did this poem deserve this moment to really be expressed, not only in words and out in public, but also through your own body, in a way that maybe your body was not as prioritized or centered in the moment of feeling when the poem really came to life?
Thank you for that question. I just really wanted to put myself inside the womb for this poem. Like it was something that I had in my mind. I wanted to take back that space, and I knew I could do it. I knew I had the right sort of production partners for it, and and it was something that I just like had in my mind. And when I shared the idea and asked if they were able to do it, and they said yes, I just kind of went for it, and then asked Anne later. I'm like, here it is. Hope you like it. And at first she's like, oh, this is new. And then it started kind of, I think, growing on her. But I think that we wanted to do something choreographic for the exhibition, because I've been exploring choreography in my work for the past almost year and a half now. And this isn't like the normal choreography that I've done, where it's very much representational, and I'm just in a room in a studio with communicating the underlying currents of emotion of a poem through movement. But actually it's quite abstract, it's quite it's produced. And so I think that it was just something that I needed to do for the poem. Like I felt like I owed it to that moment in myself, where I knew the doctor was wrong, but I didn't have that faith in myself. And I didn't dare subvert his verdict. Because, who was I to question the all-knowing medical man? Even though it was week 39, and, it was right at the very end. And so I think that I also wanted to honor that knowingness within myself, that I then later, of course, felt really badly about for a while, that I hadn't listened to. So I gave the poem that moment. Like I said, I don't think it's the most, it's almost a quiet poem. It's not a poem that does a lot of metaphor. It doesn't do a lot of rhyme. It's very straightforward. But I wanted to give it to that self who wrote it.
Thank you.
And then Paola, so I've been writing my entire life pretty much since I was in middle school, and studied literature as an undergrad, and then went to get an MFA as a poet. And I quickly realized that there were few opportunities really for writers within the traditional literary landscape, and started through the screen, right? Through that language that Doreen mentioned, sharing my language, and started having real connections such as this space thanks to the digital. And so I realized that even though I love the book and I still work really hard to publish my books, I wanted to accompany that process with something just more living, if you can imagine, more living through the virtual, more alive. And so I started digitizing my work, infusing them with voice, with visuals, and it really started changing my life in a way that the literary landscape could not. It just cannot offer that to poets, I think, as it currently is structured. I think it's a realm ripe for disruption. I don't know if there's any more questions or anything else that anyone else would like to hear about. We wanted to touch also on sort of the wider idea of curating poetry and art. And I think that, it's really great to have people like Anne, like Doreen, who see the value in this, and also like NEWFORUM, who sort of support that vision. But there are other spaces, and I really encourage writers and poets to build them on their own. Online, you really can. It's like it takes a lot of time, but it really is a possibility to build your own little cave that feels like someplace that you actually want to live.
And if I could share just a couple of thoughts in regards to this, I particularly the curating part of things. Although I would acknowledge myself as a curator who specializes in art and technology, a while ago, not that long ago, but perhaps, I don't know, almost 10 years ago, a good friend of mine who is also a writer, Monica Nepote, she told me that, if we were to think about the history of technology, we would have to acknowledge language as the very first technology of them all. And that's something that has sat with me ever since. And back then, of course, it's like, a rough idea about what do we think or how do we define technology. But then, as time goes by, it clicks even more, it makes more sense. And this was definitely a moment where I just kept going back to that idea. Of course, language is the first technology. Of course it is. In its various forms and shapes, it is. And in many ways, we're still very much evolving language into various forms and shapes. And the act of writing is very much a technological act as well, without, of course, having to touch into a whole other conversation as to why we would relate technology to something that is, artificial or something that, belongs to a different category. But actually, if we think about it through language, it hits in a different way and it makes sense in a whole different way. And then you sort of start looking into these bits and pieces that start to engage into, a whole different meaning and understanding of what technology is and particularly what technology can be moving forward. So I wanted to share that thought.
Amazing. Well, I think we can wrap things up on that wonderful note. Thank you, NEWFORUM, and everyone who was here. And we have everything online in many languages, so not just zeros and ones. So you can ask questions later too if need be.